Hi, welcome to Wake Up, the Truth About Alexa. I'm Lauren Johnson, founder of Alexa is a Human. On this podcast, you will hear true personal stories from people worldwide, sharing the impact that Alexa as a wake word has had on them. You will hear expert opinions in fields such as technology, education, psychology, and more. We will dive into corporate ethics and responsibility, name bombardment, and how Amazon's choice to use a human name as a wake word is causing young children, teens, and women to experience severe bullying, sexual harassment, suicidal ideation, name changes, anxiety, therapy, identity erasure, and more. Thanks for joining us. So welcome everyone today to another episode of Wake Up, the Truth About Alexa. Today we have Joshua Montgomery with us, and he has a pretty impressive resume, I'd say. He is the founder of Mycroft AI, which for those of you who don't know or haven't heard of it, it's a private and open source voice assistant, which is different than some of the other voice assistants, of course, we mentioned in this podcast. So Joshua, if you want to introduce a little bit about yourself and maybe even your company.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me out, Lauren. I'm Joshua Montgomery. I'm the founder of Mycroft AI. At Mycroft, we've been building a voice assistant since before our friends at Amazon and Google made it cool. Um, the idea for us was always to build something that allowed uh, people around the world to use their voice to control and interact with the digital world, um, and increasingly, with both privacy and something called user agency in mind. The idea that the technology you use represents you as the person using it, not the company that's providing it. Uh, we got started in 2015 with a Kickstarter, and it's been off to the races since then. We're really excited to be providing the world with some alternatives to some of the things coming out of Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that's really cool. And like I said, it's very different than some of the other companies we've been talking about. So I love this. This is really fascinating. We've all, I think, either read or heard about some of the bigger companies, whether it's Amazon or Google or whomever, sort of either let's call it gathering information or listening in. So I personally have a great deal of respect for Mycroft and the work that you do there, considering what you're aiming toward in terms of privacy. And so, can you explain to our listeners what an open source voice assistant is and maybe why you decided to create it that way?
Yeah. So open source software underpins most of the technologies that people use every single day. And so, open source software is software that's been built in many cases by communities of people, that's given away in most cases for free, although free and open source are actually two different ideas. The idea is that anybody can look inside the software and see how things work, and that if they want to change how something works, they have the power to go ahead and make the changes that they want to their technology. They can copy it and redistribute it in ways that make it easy for people to collaborate. And open source software really got its start in the early 1980s at MIT, and has since expanded to really inhabit almost every corner of the digital world. So the web servers that you interact with when you go out and surf the internet and view a newspaper are powered by open source technologies like WordPress. The underlying internet is powered by open technologies developed by network engineers. Things that enable you to search the internet. Google and some of these other search engines use Hadoop and other open source software in order to index and create searchable repositories for the internet. And even the browser that you use today, whether it's any of the major browsers, from Vivaldi, which is a privacy-oriented browser, to Firefox, to even Microsoft Edge or Apple Safari, are all based on an open source toolkit called WebKit, which is the foundation under which all of that software is built. And So when we looked at doing a voice assistant, and we did it for very selfish reasons, like we wanted to have a voice assistant that inhabited our makerspace and allowed us to interact with the digital world simply by speaking, right? So we could, for instance, ask the voice assistant, "Where's the hammer?" and it would take a picture of the room and identify where the hammer is, and then point a laser at the hammer, right? Something that crosses over from the world of the digital to the world of the real. uh, we decided that the technology we were building was going to be powerful enough and was going to be ubiquitous enough that it made sense for it to be open source. And so, from the very get go at our company, we've been developing this software in an open way, giving it away for free. And as a result, we have more than 60,000 members in our community who
Wow,
are using or extending the Mycroft software.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So I know that your voice assistant allows for custom wake words. Um, and was that something you created for customization? Was that for ethical reasons? Like, how did you decide that?
The ability to customize software really comes down to a concept called user agency, right? And the idea behind user agency is that the software and the computers and the cars and the products that you use should represent you as the person who is using them and not the company that built it. And so, let's take an extreme example. Let's say in the automotive industry, right? Um, in many cases, it's less expensive to pay for a fatal accident than it is for an accident in which somebody received, a life-altering injuries, right? Because with a fatal accident, you make a one-time payment. Somebody who becomes a paraplegic, you may be on the hook for medical bills for, my great uncle lasted 65 years after Tarawa. You may be on the hook for their medical bills for decades. And so, a self-driving car system, that's built with the idea of user agency in mind and is given a decision between an accident in which the passenger may be injured and an accident in which the passenger may be killed, right? Under the concept of user agency, the machine would make the decision so that the user was merely injured or the passenger was merely injured. If, on the other hand, the software that drives that vehicle is operating in the best interest of the manufacturer, right? It may make a decision that results in the fatality to the passenger because that's what's in the best interest of the automaker. And that's a very extreme example, but it kind of gives you the concept of we're now in a world where the machines around us are making a lot of decisions on our behalf. And user agency is the concept that when you interact with your laptop or when you interact with your phone, it's doing its best for you and not what's best for the company. And so in phones, for example, the tech companies have built highly addictive technologies into their various different apps because they want you to pay attention to their app for as long as they possibly can because that's how they make money, right? That might not be in your best interest, right? You as the person using the phone may, your both your economic and your psychological interests might be better served by applications that are less addictive and less engaging. But because the software that you're using when you're using technologies like Facebook um, are designed to monetize you for the company, right? They're making decisions that aren't necessarily in your best interest. And so in voice assistant space, we went into this whole idea with this whole project with the idea of user agency, that when you interact with a voice technology, it should be doing its absolute best to do what's right for you, right? So when you say, uh, add milk to my shopping list and have it delivered this afternoon, which is a technology that's already available from some voice assistants and will soon be available from all of them, it would go out and find the milk that is at the best price that meets your standard from the vendor who can get it there the fastest, and make sure that found its way to your doorstep. If, on the other hand, you're using a voice assistant that represents the company, it would, get the milk that was closest to expiration with the highest price and have that find its way to your porch. And And so in the world that we're trying to build, we want your voice assistant to represent you and not the company that built it.
That is so fascinating. I think that I wish that the whole world could hear this right now, especially with everything going on in I don't know, you've seen Instagram and Facebook and all these different apps where, they're leading to a pointing toward depression in teens and that sort of thing. And there's all these different ethical issues like that you're mentioning, and it's fascinating. So, like I said earlier, I commend you for doing this. This is really really cool. I hope that more people start to realize that there are other options out there. But
There
oh,
there
sorry.
are, but I do want to back that up. The idea of user agency only really becomes viable in an environment where there are alternatives, right? And so, one of the things that's got Meta, which used to be Facebook, under investigation and actually under indictment in dozens and dozens and dozens of jurisdictions, is the fact that in order you know to keep their network effect and to continue to grow their business, um, they went out and acquired anybody who could be seen as a viable alternative right up until they couldn't. And I guarantee you those guys would have bought TikTok if all the antitrust stuff hadn't made it politically untenable. Yeah. And and as a result, even though you might want user agency, right? Like I don't use Facebook. I fired them years ago because of their behavior. Um, but I would really love to have a lot of Facebook's features and to have a temporal timeline where I'm not being manipulated to stay on the app, where I could keep up with my cousins and my uncles and my aunts and what they're doing without being marketed to and monetized. But of course, nothing like that in a viable form exists because Facebook made sure to buy anything that could possibly become the next Facebook. Um, and so, one of the key components to user agency, to giving people the choice of using technologies that represent them, is a competitive marketplace that provides real choices for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. For everyone right now, for adults, for kids, for anyone. There's so many different issues that we could talk about there. I just like my mind's going in about 12 different directions, but I'll try. I'll try and stick to the topic. So, um, I guess a good question for you would be with Mycroft. Do you have any data? Do you know what people have chosen for names for the assistant? Hopefully, Alexa isn't your answer. But in all seriousness, do you know? Do you have any idea of what people choose? Are they
Uh,
human names or are they?
yeah, I mean the people choose. I'm actually going to look this up. I know that a lot of people use Jarvis. Hey Jarvis is one of the ones that people often use. There's a bunch of others that people use. I know that I had set Samantha up as one. It looks like Isis is another one that people are using. Christopher is another one that people use, which is I remember that one because my former CTO made it because Christopher was Alan Turing's best friend growing up. Um, I know that folks are using computer, some of them, and then uh, some less attractive some less attractive words too. Which kind of highlights um, exactly what a wake word is, right? Which is a call for service. Yeah, and so the 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 key there is that people in our community can choose a wake word, and we picked the name of the company based on a science fiction novel, but also based on the fact that there are very very few, if any. I actually don't know anybody who has a first name in Minecraft. I've never met anybody. I've met a few that have a last name of Mycroft, but a name that was invented by Arthur Conan Doyle that nobody really uses, um, and built the brand of the company and the wake word at the same time in a way that wouldn't impact other people. Now, I wish that I could sit here and say that we did that with forethought, that we thought through the problem and we're like, hey, like we shouldn't use a real world name uh, because that could impact, if we get big enough, that could impact a lot of people in real ways. But that's actually not the case. I mean, we kind of fumbled into picking a name that was unused, and then primarily because we didn't want confusion, and maybe that's really where the crux comes down to it. Is we thought through the problem enough to realize that in households, if we had named it, like just shorten the name, right? If we just named it Mike, right, instead of Mycroft, um, that people would become confused between which was the AI and which was their kid, right? And so, we wanted to pick a name that avoided any confusion, right? And as a result, we've been able to, you know, hurdle over the barrier that for example, Amazon has encountered with the name Alexa, where there are a bunch of people out there who are really named Alexa, right? Because they didn't really think through, hey, there are households out there where we don't want confusion, um, and it doesn't sound to me at all like they certainly thought through that their wake word would become, and I think you pointed this out when we spoke earlier, that the Alexa wake word is actually a synonym for servant, and that's what it's become within our society, um, and all of the impacts that'll have on people named Alexa. I mean, it, actually, it's interesting now that I think about it. All of the companies except for Amazon were able to avoid that because they wanted to prevent confusion. So Google used OK Google and Assistant. Bixby over at Samsung used Bixby. I don't know anybody whose first name is Bixby. There might be a few, but I think it's unlikely, or a small population. Apple chose Siri, which is a very uncommon name, and then Amazon chose a name that's actually reasonably common. So, and then we chose Mycroft, which is unheard of. It was really only Amazon that went out and was like, hey, we're going to use a real person's name. I had never really thought that through. Yeah, the rest of
Yeah,
us all the rest of
I
us
have.
all avoided it. The rest of us all avoided it just as a matter of course. Like why you wouldn't want your voice assistant confused with a real person, right? So
Yeah, and I have to say that, most of us, definitely, I can speak for myself, where it would, I know that this wouldn't register with me if I didn't have a daughter named Alexa. It wouldn't really be on my radar. I would understand if someone explained it to me, but it wouldn't be something that I would be aware of without someone bringing the subject up. Because I don't think if you don't have a family member with that name, I don't think that would even be a thought in your mind. You wouldn't really worry about it, which I completely understand. And I don't know. Have explained this before in the past, but with our daughter, at least, I can, and I can speak for many others as well. But it wasn't really an issue before the brand was less ubiquitous and before it grew to what it is now. It really wasn't an issue. I mean, I've told this story before, but I have brothers, and they had them in their houses, and we'd kind of make a joke, and it was funny at first, but it took at least a year before it was no longer funny and it became offensive, and kind of the whole world was now aware of this. And like you said a few minutes ago, it sort of the name became synonymous with servant. So yeah, I don't place any fault. I really don't. I mean, I think that if I were to create a company, I would think it through a little bit differently. I'll put it that way. I think that, we could have thought about what was going to happen, but I also don't think that Amazon anticipated how giant this was going to be. I mean, I'm sure they had failures in the past that weren't as successful. So I
yeah,
don't
I mean,
necessarily place any fault, but then the question is, okay, so now we do know. So then where do we go from here?
yeah, and uh, I mean, I will point out, although I think you do a good job of giving them credit. All of the other competitors in the space picked a name that wasn't confused with, that wasn't confused with real people. So it's not like it wasn't something that, this specific consequence, it becoming a synonym for servant probably wasn't on the radar, but the rest of us at least all thought, hey, it would be bad to have this confused with a real person. So, like, I mean,
Exactly. I
everyone
know.
else thought that through, right?
I
So
kind of want to go hug everyone at Google. I know. Yeah.
yeah, so and you can, there's actually a lot more. I mean, just from a straight branding perspective, there's a lot more power in in building a new word or a new brand, I'd heard the the CEO of Zillow, who also founded Expedia, interviewed on Guy Raz's podcast, How I Built This, and when they were looking for a brand for Zillow, it's actually a riff on the word pillow, right? And they invented a new word. And they just added a Z to it because it felt homey. And anyway, he's got a great explanation of it. But the point being that if you invent a new word, you get to define what that word means and build a brand around it, as opposed to if you pick up an existing word or a pair of existing words, like you're kind of stuck with the social history of that language. And so, from a purely branding perspective, it's much more powerful to build a brand new word or a brand new wake word than it is to riff on something that exists. And
Absolutely.
so,
I never knew that about Zillow. That's really interesting.
yeah, and so and yeah, I mean, I don't think that any, when Amazon originally started their project in 2011, I think that they were either on the cusp of or just had um, completed the catastrophe that was the Fire phone. I don't know if you remember, Amazon tried to ship a phone and it did
Yep.
not go well.
Yep.
And so they didn't necessarily, you're right. I doubt that they really realized, I certainly didn't when we started building smart speakers, that it was going to be such a huge thing. But by the same token, companies have a responsibility. The airbags is a great example. A failure rate of a few airbags per million, right, is unacceptable. Right, it's unacceptable. In a smaller business where the airbag companies were shipping 1,000 airbags a year, a 1 in a million failure rate might be acceptable in that scenario, right? Um, but they're shipping tens or hundreds of millions of airbags a year, and if 100 or 200 of those go off unintentionally, like that's grounds for well for the death penalty for the company, corporate death penalty, right? Uh, and as the bigger tech companies scale up to tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of customers, um, they have a responsibility to think through the consequences of their actions, and uh, we didn't think of that. Law of unintended consequences. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse when you're banking hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Like, you have a responsibility to think through the edge cases.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So, what do you think if Amazon were to either allow custom wake words or to change the default? Like, what's more likely? Do you think if they were going to do it? Is it possible? And from a technical perspective or a branding perspective, what does that look like? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's just a money thing. I mean, at the end of the day, they would need to rebrand their voice assistant with a new brand, which would be expensive. Uh, there's no doubt about it. Uh, but many other companies have rebranded, uh, very very successfully. And so, the it really comes down to somebody having the political will and seeing that the impact. And they, like many other companies, are a business. And so, somebody will build a spreadsheet somewhere and say, okay, well, here's the financial impact, and here's you can actually, calculate the dollar impact to your brand of various different activities, right? Um, here's the adverse financial impact on one side and the PR impact, and here's the impact on the other side. Like, what do we do? Um, the question really comes down to is how that analysis shakes out. Now, I will say that I'm not um, optimistic that spreadsheet is going to show that it makes a lot of financial sense for them to rebrand, given that half the packages that you purchase nowadays say Alexa enabled or Alexa inside, right? They've done a real good job of building this brand. Um, but there are places where changes can be made, right? So, I think that the place where, the place within the process that, that can be changed without a huge financial investment would be around the initial customer experience, right? So when you first break one of these things out of the box, or you first install the app, right? Asking the customer, what to name their voice assistant, right? Or just giving it a randomly generated name, right? And then providing some additional personalization uh, steps, would result in a voice assistant that's unique to everybody, and really, clamp down on the power of their product to create that synonym, right? And so in that scenario, when you open a speaker, it would say, what should I be named? Or it should be, it would go through a list of whatever, 1,000 names, and pick one based on, geography, and, they have a lot of information about the customer already, based on, well, I mean, they do, like, if you're,
Yeah.
if you're in northern Minnesota, and, where my family comes from, like, it wouldn't be, completely out of the park to have a voice assistant named Olaf, right?
Yeah.
Um, that would be a little weirder in, Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so I think that's the place at where you can really, create a better experience for your customer, right? So the customer has personalization, and, they may feel a little bit more like this thing is not an all-seeing, all-hearing, device that lives in their room. Uh, but then, and I don't know if it would actually fix that all-seeing, all-hearing problem, but at least it makes people feel better about it. Uh, and then number two, it removes the power of the unified brand, right? Where all of the voice assistants have the same name. I don't think that I'm in this market. I keep a good eye on what the competitive landscape looks like. Given Amazon's current competitive position, I honestly don't think it hurts them to allow people to customize it. Like it, I mean, they're just so dominant that, that becomes a feature that they can enable without really damaging their brand. And in that case, maybe they're able to keep the brand for the broader voice assistant, but really tamp down on the power of the wake word Alexa to impact other people.
Yeah, and I talked to a mom of just going back to what you said a few minutes ago too. I talked to a mom of a teenager who was struggling. She's since changed her name, but struggling with suicidal ideation over the amount of bullying and harassment she received over this. And she said something too, like I can't imagine that they would see the risk in this, and how much, when they're looking at the dollar amount, how much do they have to look at? But then, her daughter is okay, but how do you put a price on a life either? Like, what if it gets a step further for some of these, especially these teenagers? And I think women deal with, for the most part, from what I'm hearing, is identity erasure, just being able to kind of walk in a room and use your name. But for the kids, there's a lot of bullying, harassment, and I think college age women, there's sexual harassment. So I don't know. I don't know if they will or if they won't. But I guess we'll keep plugging away at it. It's just I don't know. As I always say, not something I ever thought I would get involved in, but here I am, and we'll do our best.
Yeah. Well,
So I guess. Oh, sorry.
uh, well, yeah. I mean, and then the other thing is, giving people real choices. And so, one of the things that, we're doing a couple things that are unique here. One is building a smart speaker with privacy in mind. So the idea that we don't keep, store, sell, monetize, listen, watch. The smart speaker represents the customer, not us. And then the ability to customize it, right? So, one of the reasons that this is an issue at all is because one company has become so dominant in the space that, they're just like Q-tips or Kleenex, right? Their brand has become synonymous with the product.
Exactly.
um, People out there who have an interest in, using this tech without being spied on could do worse than, engaging with us. And then, at the end of the day, it's a huge market. It's fast growing. We're working very hard to get, some competitive products in the market, but that takes money. So, people who have an interest in supporting this tech, and building open technologies, and then, ideally, get paid out for it, should take a look at our crowdfunding campaign, and see if that's something that they're interested in investing or supporting.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask you. So, how do people purchase the Mycroft Assistant, and how can we support your journey? How can we, how do people, if they want to, how do they do that?
So there's a few different ways. An easy way is to pre-order one of our devices. It only costs $1. We shipped a first version of that device 2-3 years ago, sold out. We're on our second version, and cross fingers, global supply chain permitting, we should be shipping those mid-year next year. The other place is by investing. We are a small startup company, who've eschewed this Silicon Valley venture capital, spy on everybody and monetize the user as the product. We've really sidestepped that by using crowdfunding since the inception. So, we really rely on small investors and backers to provide the financial resources to get us to the point where we are relevant, and where people are given real choices when they're standing in the aisle as to whether to purchase a product from a company that you know is under indictment, and on and on and on. And you could actually point at any of the Silicon Valley giants and say that they're under indictment in multiple jurisdictions that have engaged in a bunch of unethical behavior, or small companies that have a moral compass that points north, and follow that studiously. So anyway, those are the places where we'd love some assistance. So
Well, thank you so much for being on. If there's anything you want to add, feel free. I know we're a little bit over, so I just want to thank you so much for taking the time. And I know it is first thing in the morning there; it's the afternoon here, but so
yeah,
thanks
no,
for having your first call with us.
yeah, it's great to chat, and I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what kind of results you get. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, uh, given their market position, there's no reason that some tweaks to the setup process couldn't result in a lot less attention to the default wake word. My question is can they get there, and and if so, are they willing to? So I'm curious. I'm looking forward to watching this unfold.